We start off by seeing the driver talking on the phone about driving for a job. He calls the shots and explains that he will be in their employ for exactly 5 minutes, no more and no less. His role is as a getaway driver. The driver arrives at the garage he works at, and Shannon shows the driver to the car he requested, a late model Chevy Impala, the most common car in line. This is chosen because it will make searching for him harder. The driver heads to an office park, and outside on the sidewalk are 2 men in ski masks carrying guns. The driver nods to the men and puts 5 minutes on his watch. The 2 men race in the building. We hear gunshots follow, and alarms go off. The 2 men come to the Impala's open doors and flee. The driver expertly avoids many police cruisers, and after a chase, he arrives at the Staples Center and ditches the car and gunmen. The driver easily avoids police by blending in with the basketball crowd. The next day, the driver and Shannon are on a movie set. We see the driver here working as a stunt driver. The driver does a good stunt. After the shoot, he heads to the grocery store where he sees Irene and her son shopping. Irene is his neighbor in the apartment building they live at. In the parking lot, he sees that their car won't start and gives them a ride home and helps her in with their groceries. Shannon has a meeting with former movie producer Bernie Rose. Shannon proposes to Bernie that he loan him $400,000 to buy a stock car that the driver will drive in NASCAR races. During their conversation, Nino, the owner of a pizza place, enters and berates Shannon. The following day, the driver is working at Shannon's garage when Irene and her son Benicio arrive with her car on a flatbed. Shannon gives driver an excuse to drive her and her son home. The driver takes them on a joyride through the La River Basin and then to a small stream where they have a good time. Over a few days, the 3 become good friends, and the driver and Irene share unspoken attraction for each other. After, Irene receives a phone call from her lawyer and finds out her husband, who has spent the last few years in jail, will be released in the morning. The following night, Irene and Benicio welcome back her husband, Standard, with a big party. During the party, the driver leaves his apartment to find Irene sitting in the hallway, tired looking. The 2 flirt, but then Standard comes out and intrudes. The situation gets uncomfortable fast, but nothing happens. The scene ends. The driver returns to his apartment and sees 2 thugs carrying bats walking through the parking garage. The driver finds Standard beaten and bloodied, all while telling Benicio to keep the situation secret from his mom. The driver takes them both upstairs and helps Standard clean up. After a day or 2, Standard admits when he was in prison, he was offered and received $2,000 worth of protection from other inmates. After leaving prison, the amount has been increasing, and he now owes Cook $20,000. In the parking garage, he was offered a chance to cancel his debt by running a job for Cook. Cook wants him to rob a pawn shop, but Standard won't risk going back to prison and says no. Standard was savagely beaten because of this. Even worse, Benicio shows a bullet and explains to the driver that the 2 thugs gave it to him as a warning. If Standard doesn't do the job, Irene and Benicio will die too. The driver takes the bullet. The driver goes to Cook and offers his services to him. Cook introduces him to Blanche. Blanche will accompany Standard and the driver on the heist as insurance. The driver sets his watch as Standard and Blanche make their way inside, guns drawn. A car pulls into the lot. Moments later, Blanche calmly exits carrying a large duffel bag stuffed with money. Standard follows shortly thereafter just as gunshots fire from the inside of the shop. Standard is first wounded in the neck and then shot to death. The driver and Blanche escape from the parking lot and are pursued by the car. The driver escapes and finds a hotel room and hides out while they watch the news. The news says the pawn shop owners said that Standard acted alone and that no money was stolen. Confused and angry, the driver slaps Blanche and orders her to tell him about Cook. Crying, she tells him where he works. Her cell phone suddenly vibrates and the driver notices a dark figure lurking outside the window. Through the bathroom window, another man raises a shotgun and shoots Blanche in the head, point blank, killing her. The driver barricades the front door and kills the man in the bathroom before shooting the second man with his partner's shotgun. He calls Irene and Benicio answers, who tells him that his mom is busy talking to the police. The driver drives to Cook's strip club. He makes his way to the dressing room, hammer in hand, and upon meeting Cook, he repeatedly bashes his hand with the hammer. He throws Cook on the ground and places Benicio's bullet to his forehead, and he threatens to hammer the bullet into his head. Cook concedes and tells one of his girls to call the boss, Nino. The driver takes the cell phone and has a brief conversation with Nino. The driver will turn over the duffel bag full of money if Nino agrees to leave him, Irene and Benicio alone. Nino laughs at the driver's poor negotiation skills but tells him that he agrees. Nino hangs up and tells one of his thugs to go find the driver. The driver returns to his apartment where he finds Irene in a state of shock. He confesses his involvement in the heist that resulted in Standard's death. She slaps him and heads to the elevator. The driver follows her into the elevator as the doors part. Inside, Nino's thug waits. The 3 calmly stand in the elevator. The driver looks inside the thug's jacket at the butt of his gun. The driver carefully pushes Irene behind him, turns around and kisses her passionately. He then swiftly knocks the thug down, disarms him, and stomps on his head until it pops open. Irene looks on, shocked, and the two part ways. Back at Nino's pizzeria, Bernie and Nino watch Cook eat. Cook's arm is fractured in multiple places, and his face is messed up. Bernie pleads with Nino to understand why Nino set a hitman on the driver and his girlfriend. Nino explains that he ordered the pawn shop job because the owner has connections to the East Coast mob, and the mob was stashing $1 million there for the sake of future expansion. The mob always disrespected Nino because he was a Jew, and this was the opportunity to both steal from them and start his own crew. The plan was that standard. Blanche and the driver were supposed to be killed by his men, eliminating any connection to him. The driver is a liability to everybody. Bernie angrily takes a fork and stabs Cook in the eye before repeatedly slicing open his throat with a butcher knife. Bernie tells Nino that they both have to get their hands dirty. Bernie will take care of Shannon, and Nino will take care of the driver. Shannon returns to his garage, where he finds Bernie waiting for him. Bernie asks where the driver is, and Shannon lies, telling him that he fled the country. Bernie notices that Shannon's bags are packed and goes to shake his hand. Shannon accepts the gesture, and Bernie produces a razor with his free hand and slashes Shannon's forearm, wrist to elbow, down to the bone. He lays Shannon down and tells him that his death will be painless. Bernie returns home, cleans the razor, and waits for Nino to fulfill his end of the deal. The driver arrives at Shannon's shop and finds the deceased Shannon sitting in a pool of his own blood. Angry, the driver takes the money, puts it in his car, and drives to the movie set. He steals the latex mask and drives to Nino's pizzeria. He dons the mask, walks up to the front door, and sees a party happening inside. The driver returns to his car and waits. Nino exits and drunkenly piles into his town car. The driver follows them up to the PCH and intentionally rear-ends them before driving off. The town car stops on the shoulder, at the edge of a cliff overlooking the beach. The town car's driver checks the damage and gets back in the car just as the driver's headlights blind Nino. The driver T-bones the town car, sending it tumbling over the 30-foot cliff, and watches it roll onto the beach below. The battered Nino crawls out of the wreckage and sees the masked driver overlooking the wreck. The driver descends the cliff face and follows Nino into the water. He forces Nino's head below the water, drowning him. The driver calls Bernie and tells him that he doesn't want the money. He just wants Irene, Benicio, and himself to be left alone. Bernie refuses to talk specifically over the phone, telling the driver instead to meet him at a Chinese restaurant to discuss the arrangements. The driver phones Irene and apologizes for his involvement in Standard's death and thanks her for the greatest time of his life. The driver arrives at the Chinese restaurant and sits down at a table across from Bernie. Bernie explains that Irene and Benicio are safe. There is nothing to lead anything back to them. However, the driver has made many enemies and cannot be simply forgiven for what he's done. Bernie asks where the money is, and the driver takes him out to the parking lot. He opens the trunk of his car and drops the duffel bag onto the pavement. Bernie stabs the driver in the stomach with a concealed blade, and the driver does the same to him. The driver overpowers Bernie and slowly kills him. The driver clutches the wound in his abdomen and gets into his car, leaving the dead Bernie and open bag of cash on the pavement. He drives off into inner Los Angeles. Irene listens to the driver's message. The driver keeps driving. His fate is unknown.